And then the king raised his hand high, ready to strike the white man who dared to love his daughter. I never thought I would see the day when a father would punish his child for love. But that was the day everything changed in our village. I still remember the day it all happened. I was just a boy, but I saw everything. It was a story that no one in our village would ever forget. The story of Princess Nma and the white missionary, Brother John. It all began when Brother John came to our village. He came with his big Bible and a kind heart, teaching us about his God. But no one ever thought he would fall in love with our princess. Princess Nma was the most beautiful girl in our village. She had long braids, skin that shone like the sun, and eyes that sparkled like stars. Everyone admired her. She was the daughter of King Obieze, our great king. Nma always listened to her father, respected our traditions, and was loved by everyone. But one day, everything changed. Brother John was not like the other men in our village. He was tall, with pale skin and blue eyes that looked like the sky. He was gentle and spoke softly. Many of the villagers liked him, but some did not trust him because he came from a faraway land. They called him the stranger. Nma and Brother John met when he came to teach us how to read and write. At first, it was just friendly conversations. Brother John would tell Nma stories about his homeland, and Nma would listen with interest. But as time passed, something more than friendship grew between them. One evening, as the sun was setting, I saw them by the river. They were sitting on a big rock, talking and laughing. I hid behind a tree, watching them. Suddenly, Brother John held Nma's hand. "Nma," he said, "I don't know how to say this, but I love you. I have loved you since the first day I saw you." I gasped. Love? How could a white man love our princess? I knew this was trouble. Nma looked at him with wide eyes. "Brother John," she whispered, "we cannot be together. My father will never allow it. It is against our tradition." "I know," Brother John replied, "but love does not follow traditions. I don't care what anyone says. I love you and I want to be with you." For a moment, Nma was silent. Then, to my surprise, she said, "I love you too." I couldn't believe my ears. The princess had fallen in love with the white man. They promised to keep their love a secret. But secrets in the village don't stay hidden for long. One day, Nma's friend, Ogechi, saw them together. She was shocked and ran to tell the queen. The queen was furious. She called Nma to the palace and asked her, "Is it true? Are you in love with that white man?" Nma lowered her head. "Yes, mother, it is true." The queen's face turned red with anger. "You're a princess. You cannot marry a white man. What would the people say? What will your father say?" Nma's heart was heavy, but she did not back down. "Mother, I love him. I want to be with him." The queen slapped her. "You will do no such thing." The news soon reached the king. He was even angrier than the queen. He summoned Brother John to the palace. I was there, standing outside the palace, peeking through the door. The king's voice thundered through the room. "How dare you love my daughter? You're a stranger. You do not belong here. You will leave my village at once." But Brother John was brave. He stood tall and said, I will not leave. I love your daughter and I want to marry her. The king's eyes blazed with rage. You? Marry my daughter? Never! It is against our tradition. No one in my family will marry a white man. Brother John tried to explain. Love is not about skin color or traditions. Love is about the heart. But the king would not listen. If you do not leave by tomorrow morning, I will have you punished, he shouted. Brother John had no choice but to leave the palace. But he did not leave the village. He stayed because he could not leave Nma. The next day, the king gathered the elders and told them about Nma and Brother John. The elders agreed with the king. They said it was forbidden for a princess to marry a white man. It would bring shame to the royal family and the village. That evening, I saw Nma sitting by the river, crying. Brother John came to her side. Nma, he said, we must leave the village. If we stay, your father will never let us be together. Nma looked at him with tears in her eyes. But this is my home. My people are here. How can I leave them? If you stay, we will never be free to love each other, Brother John replied. Nma wiped her tears and nodded. You are right. We must leave. But before they could make their plan, something terrible happened. Ogechi, who was jealous of Nma, overheard their conversation and ran to tell the king. That night, the king sent his guards to find Brother John. They searched the village and soon found him hiding near the river. They brought him to the palace and tied him up. I was there, hiding behind a tree, watching everything. The king was furious. You dare to defy me, he shouted. You will pay for this. He ordered the guards to take Brother John to the village square. There, the whole village gathered to watch. The king raised his hand high, ready to punish Brother John. But just as he was about to strike, Nma ran into the square, crying, Father, please, don't hurt him. I love him. The king froze. The whole village was silent. No one had ever seen the princess so desperate. The king looked at Nma with sadness in his eyes. My daughter, he said, I do this to protect you. This man cannot be with you. It is against our tradition. But father, Nma pleaded, I don't care about tradition. I care about love. The king shook his head. You are young. You don't understand. If you break our traditions, you will bring dishonor to our family. Nma fell to her knees, sobbing. I don't care about dishonor. I care about him. For a moment, the king was silent. Then he spoke softly. If you choose this man, you will no longer be my daughter. You will be banished from this village. The whole village gasped. Banished? No one could believe what they were hearing. Nma looked at Brother John, then at her father. Her heart was torn. I love you, father, she whispered, but I also love him. With that, Nma made her choice. She stood up, took Brother John's hand, and together they walked out of the village. The king watched them go, his face full of sorrow. He had lost his daughter, all because of love. And that is the story of Princess Nma and Brother John, or so we thought. They left our village that night and were never seen for a very long time. Some said they went to Brother John's homeland and lived happily. Others said they faced many challenges and hardships. But one thing was certain. Nma's love for Brother John changed everything. It taught us that love is powerful. even more powerful than tradition. I often wondered what happened to them. Did they find happiness? Did they regret their decision? No one knew for a very long time. But we will never forget the day Princess chose love over tradition. It was the day our village learned that sometimes love is worth fighting for, no matter the cost. Years passed after Princess Nma and Brother John left the village. Life in our village continued, but the memory of that fateful day still lingered in the minds of everyone. Some of the villagers whispered about the curse that would fall upon the royal family for allowing such a breach of tradition. Others wondered if Nma and Brother John were still alive and if they ever found peace. I too couldn't stop thinking about them. I was older now, no longer the little boy hiding behind trees, and I often found myself at the river where they used to meet. The place had become quiet, almost sacred. Sometimes I would sit by the water and imagine their voices, laughing and planning their future. One evening, when the sky was painted with shades of pink and orange, something strange happened. I was sitting by the river when I saw a figure approaching. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light. But as the figure drew closer, my heart started racing. It was a woman, tall and graceful, her skin glowing in the dim light. Nma, I whispered to myself. As she stepped into the light, I saw her face clearly. It was Princess Nma, older now, but still just as beautiful as the day she left. She wore simple clothes, no longer dressed in the fine garments of royalty, but her eyes were filled with the same kindness and strength I remembered. I stood up quickly, unable to believe what I was seeing. Princess Nma, I called out. She smiled softly, but there was a sadness in her eyes. Hello, Chima, she said. I knew you would still be here. I ran to her, my heart pounding. Where have you been? What happened? Is Brother John with you? She looked down at the ground for a moment before answering. So much has happened, Chima. I've come back, but not for long. There is something I need to tell my father. Your father? I asked, confused. But after you left, the king, he said you were no longer his daughter. Nma sighed deeply. I know, but I have come to see him one last time. I didn't understand, but I knew better than to ask too many questions. Let me take you to the palace, I offered. We walked through the village together, and as we passed the familiar huts and paths, people began to notice her. Whispers spread quickly, and as soon as the whole village knew the princess was around, everyone gathered. By the time we reached the palace gates, a crowd had gathered behind us, watching in silence. The guards at the gate were stunned to see her. They hesitated, unsure of what to do. But Nma stepped forward with confidence. I am here to see my father, she said. The guards looked at each other nervously before one of them nodded and hurried inside. Moments later, the king appeared at the top of the palace steps. His face, once full of strength and pride, now looked older, wearier. When he saw Nma standing at the gate, he froze. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The crowd was silent, waiting. Finally, Nma took a deep breath and said, Father, I have come to see you. The king's voice was quiet, almost trembling. Why have you returned, Nma? You left this village and turned your back on your people. You chose the stranger over your family. Nma stepped forward, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I chose love, Father, and I do not regret it. But I did not come to speak about the past. I have come because I am carrying your grandchild. A collective gasp echoed through the crowd. My heart raced. The king's face turned pale, and he gripped the railing of the steps as if to steady himself. You? You have a child? The king whispered. Nma nodded. Yes, a son. His name is Chukwudi, and he is a part of me, a part of our family. But he is also a part of Brother John. The king's expression hardened. You expect me to accept a child born of a forbidden union? A child who does not belong to our people? Nma stood tall, her voice steady. He belongs to me, and I belong to this village. No matter what you say, no matter what our traditions are, I am your daughter, and my son deserves to know his people, to know where he comes from. The king was silent, his eyes filled with conflict. The crowd behind us murmured softly, uncertain of what would happen next. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and heavy. Finally, the king spoke again, his voice low and filled with pain. You have broken my heart, Nma. You defied everything I believed in. But you are still my daughter. And if you truly believe that your child deserves to be part of this family, then bring him to me. Nma's eyes filled with tears as she stepped forward and knelt before her father. Thank you, father. The king reached out, his hand trembling as he gently touched her head. Bring the child tomorrow. We will decide his place in this village then. With those words, the king turned and walked back into his palace, leaving Nma and the rest of us standing in silence. I couldn't believe what had just happened. The princess had returned, and she had a child. But what would happen next? Would the village accept her son? Or would the old traditions tear them apart once again? That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Nma, about her child, and about what the future would hold. The next day would be the day that decided everything. And so, the story of Princess Nma was far from over. It was just beginning again, in a new and unexpected way. What would happen when the village met her child? Would love finally triumph? Or would the past repeat itself? Only time would tell. The next morning, the village was buzzing with excitement and tension. Word had spread quickly that Princess Nma was going to bring her child to the palace. Some villagers whispered that the king would never truly accept the child, while others believed that the bond of family might finally break the traditions that had kept them apart. I was one of the first to arrive at the palace gates that day, standing with a crowd of villagers who had gathered to witness what would happen. The air was thick with anticipation, and everyone was on edge. Would the king keep his promise and accept his grandson? Or would tradition win out once again? As the sun climbed higher in the sky, I saw Nma approaching from the distance, carrying a small bundle in her arms. She walked with calm determination, her face a mixture of hope and fear. The crowd parted as she made her way towards the palace, and I could see that many of the villagers were unsure of what to think. When she reached the palace gates, the guards opened them without hesitation. Nma stepped through, and I followed behind, keeping my distance, but not wanting to miss a moment of what was about to unfold. The king was already waiting in the courtyard, standing with the elders of the village. His face was as stern as ever, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, something I couldn't quite place. The queen stood beside him, her expression unreadable. Nma approached her father and knelt down, holding the child close. "Father," she said softly, "this is Chukwudi, your grandson." For a long moment, the king did not move. His eyes were fixed on the baby, but his face remained stone-like, giving nothing away. Finally, the queen stepped forward. She reached out, her hand trembling slightly, and gently touched the baby's cheek. "He is beautiful," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. The king's jaw tightened, but still he said nothing. The tension in the courtyard grew unbearable as everyone waited for his reaction. Nma, still kneeling, looked up at her father. "I know I went against your wishes, and I understand why you were angry. But Chukwudi is innocent. He deserves to know his family, and he deserves your love." The king's gaze finally shifted from the child to Nma. His voice was low, almost a growl. "You defied me, Nma. You defied everything I stand for. You abandoned your people for a man who does not belong here." Nma didn't flinch. She met her father's eyes with calm determination. "I did not abandon my people, father. I made a choice, and I would make it again, because love is worth more than fear. But I have come back, not to ask for forgiveness, but to ask you to look beyond tradition and see the truth. This is your blood. He is a part of you, just as I am." The king's fists clenched at his sides. His face was hard, and for a moment, I thought he would turn his back on her, on the child. The silence was deafening. Then, without warning, one of the elders, an old man named Uchenna, stepped forward. He was the wisest of the elders and often spoke when the king hesitated. "Your Majesty," Uchenna said slowly, "we have always followed the ways of our ancestors. Our traditions are important, but times change, and sometimes love shows us a path we do not expect." The king glared at Uchenna, but the elder did not back down. "This child is your blood," Uchenna continued, his voice steady. "He is the future. We must ask ourselves, are we so bound by the past that we would turn away from the future?" The king's eyes flashed with anger. "Are you suggesting we forget our traditions, Elder Uchenna? That we allow the daughter of kings to bear a child of mixed blood and call him our own?" Uchenna bowed his head respectfully. "I am suggesting that we find a way to honor both the past and the present. The world is changing, Your Majesty. If we hold too tightly to what has been, we may lose what could be." The king's face softened, just for a moment, before he turned back to Nma. The crowd watched in tense silence as the king finally took a step forward. He looked down at his daughter, his face filled with years of pain, pride, and sorrow. "If I accept this child," the king said slowly, "if I welcome him into our family, it will change everything. Our people may not understand. They may turn against you, against me." Nma stood, still holding her son in her arms. They may, she agreed, but they may also find hope. They may learn that love is stronger than fear, and that family is not about bloodlines alone, but about the bonds we share, we choose to create. The king stared at her for what felt like an eternity. Then, with a sigh so deep, it seemed to come from his very soul, he held out his arms. Let me see my grandson. A collective gasp went through the crowd as Nma stepped forward and placed the baby gently in the king's arms. The king looked down at the tiny face, his expression softening for the first time since the whole ordeal had begun. Chukwudi, the king whispered, his voice thick with emotion. God is. For a moment, there was silence. Then the queen stepped forward, her eyes brimming with tears. She placed a hand on the baby's head and smiled softly. Welcome home, she whispered. And just like that, the spell was broken. The tension that had gripped the village for so long began to melt away. The crowd murmured softly, unsure but hopeful. Some of the villagers began to nod, slowly accepting what they had witnessed. The king looked up at Nma, his voice still heavy with emotion. You are my daughter, Nma. You always have been. I see that now. Nma's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled, her heart full of relief and love. Thank you, Father. From that day forward, Chukwudi was accepted into the royal family. The village didn't change overnight, and there were still whispers of doubt and suspicion. But as time went on, people began to see that love and family were more important than the old traditions that had once divided them. And as for Nma and Brother John, they remained together, raising their son with both the love of Nma's people and the lessons of Brother John's world. The village grew to accept their union, not as a rejection of tradition, but as a new path forward. In the end, love had won. It had not been easy, but it had triumphed over fear and tradition. And in that victory, the village found a new kind of peace. I often sit by the river now, watching as the next generation of children play and laugh. They don't care about the color of skin or the old rules that once kept people apart. They care only about the joy of living, the bonds of friendship, and the love that brings us all together. And I think to myself, that is how it should be. That is how it should continue to be. It should never change. It should remain like this. Love would always win. This is the end of today's story. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this. And I hope you learned one or two lessons from this story. Please, I hope you have subscribed to my channel. I want to say a very big thank you to my returning subscribers and then to my new subscribers. We are growing this community gradually, and I thank you all. Please make sure you subscribe. Please make sure to also leave a comment, also like, and also share. Tell a friend to come and watch and listen to our stories on this channel. Thank you guys so much, and God bless you. Do not forget to turn on the notification button so that you will always be the first to know when I post a new story. Thank you guys once more, and I love you all. Bye.